a day, wishing you a very good time of day, wherever you may be in Europe or perhaps Antipodes or wherever. I've got to just do a little check. Am I clearly audible? Yeah. Okay. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Great. Okay. Well, thank you all for, gathering again like this in these retreats where we're studying, you could say, different levels of love. We start with developing loving awareness. That's what we call mindfulness. Then we start opening up to the possibility of recognizing with how much support we have as human beings that we don't ordinarily feel or acknowledge, perhaps. Our very existence is given to us. It's not generated by us, so to speak. We owe it. We owe our existence, totally to others, all kinds of others. So we start to realize how important it is to be open to that side of our being, that we're, even in practice, we may get this idea that it's all down to us to sort of generate our practice, and our path of practice is followed kind of by us. Well, that's true, but at the same time, there's just so much support in so many ways pouring into our practice. So to open up to that can be really helpful. And then we were looking at getting into deeper states of mind, really, which there's a whole kind of family of them that come under the term samadhi, sometimes translated concentration. We've been looking at them as well. They are, I think, in many traditions of practice, they're considered very sort of, rather an important phase to start experiencing that. Effortless, selfless, timeless, profoundly fulfilling states. With the acknowledgement that they're not yet quite what we consider awakening, at least in the Buddhist world. And so this retreat is where we land a little bit more in the territory of awakening. So the idea is that we're going to start to explore the ways, awakening can sort of manifest, and what it means, and so on. But I think I want to just start with a reminder that you might say that the project is creating a kinder, happier world. That's the project. It begins by acknowledging that there's a lot of suffering in the world. Some is perhaps inevitable, but a great deal, especially in the human world, is not inevitable. It can be changed by us human beings. It can be changed both for ourselves and for others. So the overview is a happier, kinder world. The means that's at hand for our practice to work on is essentially each of us. So each of us is doing our practice in the hope of becoming, dare we say it, kinder, wiser beings. That's the point, really, of this practice. Within that, could we call it goal, aim, objective, possibility, there is this most wonderful kind of shift that is possible for us, known as awakening. That is by no means the only helpful thing practice has to offer, not at all. And I want to emphasize that because it can get distorted in certain traditions, and so that it seems that that is the one and only thing. However, it does have a sort of unique power to be profoundly helpful because it involves a really, dare I say, sort of staggering shift in how we experience self and world. Really a reversal almost of many of our, actually maybe not so many, certain key assumptions and preconceptions, conditioned ways of processing experience, key fundamental ones, can get overturned in this experience. And that can be profoundly helpful. However, there is this proviso that it's probably not enough, actually, in and of itself. We like to think it is, some of us, but actually it's perfectly possible, as we know from the annals of spirituality and spiritual projects over the millennia, that it's quite possible for people to have awakened but still be unclear in certain areas of life. It's not a universal panacea, although it seems like it. So it's good to, that's one of the motivations I personally have in doing these original love retreats, is the reminder that it's not like this business of awakening is the one and only thing. Absolutely not. These other elements, components, zones, dimensions, modes, arenas of practice, they're all terribly important. So now, just to sum up this little intro piece, I want to just touch on rather, a metaphor you may have heard before, that it used to be said, I think, back in the 60s and 70s about spiritual practice, and I think this was said in the Zen world, changing the forest by changing the trees. That if we, if, in other words, the responsibility for each of us individually to do our sitting practice is that, we're a tree. As we change one by one, cleaning up our own backyard, the whole forest will start to change. That's been a sort of working assumption, I think, in the world of modern Western spirituality. But alas, it perhaps hasn't taken account of, well, what happens when we may be doing that, but the people managing the forest management is catastrophic and profoundly unwise and profoundly careless and heedless, and has no understanding at all of the engines of suffering. What happens when, we're all dutifully, diligently doing our practice, trying to make ourselves, a kindly, sheltering kind of a tree, a good, robust, healthy, broad, sheltering tree, but you've got forest managers who are wrecking the forest. What happens then? That's the real situation. We have terrible, terrible leaders across the world, with a very few exceptions, who are deeply steeped in a system that is 100% governed by what Buddhism calls the three poisons: greed, ill will, delusion. So it seems clear that we're not let off the hook for doing our own practice. That remains necessary. But to only do that with without glancing at the system in which we find ourselves. It's, you know, it's not for I don't think it's really for spiritual teachers, if that's what I could call myself, to be telling everybody what to do. But we must, I think, know what's going on. We have a duty to be educated about what's going on, about how this country and others around the world are oppressing their own citizens, how hate gets incited, and apparently a lot of people like it, and violence gets incited, and a lot of people like it. We need to be aware of that. And I'm happy that, you know, we at Mountain Cloud are sort of delving deep into ourselves to become more aware. I'm talking about the board, and I think our community as a whole, to be more aware of systemic oppression, racism, sexism, and all the other diseases, delusions that are current in the world today. I mean, I know I'm saying this, I mean, just after, because our last retreat, late October, was right before the harrowing event of the election. And this retreat is a couple of weeks. My math's not very good. Yeah, I think a couple of weeks after it. And it seems like it's been nail biting even after the election. But I think seems, as far as I can tell, that it's going the right way in spite of vociferous, noisy efforts by idiots. I think you know what I'm talking about, and it's probably not very Buddhist and kind of me. I'm sorry. May all beings be well, even the orange-haired one. May they all be well, even the ogre. No, that's not very nice either. not the ogre. the you know, he's handy because he's really, you can see the three poisons so clearly, and there's absolutely no attempt to disguise them. They're just absolutely there, front and center: greed, hate, ignorance, blazing forth. So it's very handy for us. We should be grateful, actually, to see such a clear manifestation of us and find our own inner demons, you know, which we all have, and hence we practice. Okay. Ding, ding, ding. So that's a little bit of context setting. Now, the point about awakening, let me just start here. The real heart of the matter of awakening is this, as I see it: the fairy tale is true. The thing we most yearn for and hope for, the fulfillment of all our wishes, the fulfillment of our dreams, the you know, the end of the happy fairy tale is true. It's not just the end, but the way that fairy tales have this inevitability that, you know, that I'm thinking of one of those, I don't know whether you get these in America, but in England, at seaside things, they used to have this thing where you run a coin down a little chute, and then it gets on this sloping vortex funnel type of thing. I don't know if you can see, going round and round this thing. And at the bottom, it gets narrower and narrower, and there's a little hole at the bottom, and down the coin goes. And you just do it for the fun of watching it, spiraling round this thing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do they exist in America at seaside fairs and things? Yeah. So that is the inevitability of the infinite well-being of awakening. It's gonna pull us down until we drop into it. It's inevitable. So that's the happy fairy tale side of it. Like, you know, it's as if it's as if we're already caught in this infinite benevolence, but we don't know it at all. We're wrestling and struggling and trying to make sense of things, and we got these three poisons in us, and so we don't know that they're poisons. They seem to be perfectly reasonable. I got to try to get the life I want, quote unquote. So therefore, I'm wrestling and trying, and it's so hard, and we don't realize that that whole situation is within a greater context of benevolence. And try as we might to wrestle things around our way, hopefully, especially if we get involved in the context of practice, we will eventually start to shed pieces of the old way. We'll let go of the ways we've been trying to do things and find more and more compassion is spontaneously present. More and more wonder can be spontaneously present. More and more sort of readiness to go along with life. This is not, by the way, a smooth straight line graph. It's going to come and go, but overall we're going to get more and more of it. And then and all of that is, from the point of view of awakening, it's bringing us closer and closer to the truth of awakening, the truth that we awaken to in awakening. And that of course, is, well, that's what we're going to start looking at a little bit. But I don't know if I've conveyed this well, this business about the fairy tale. Like, let me just give a couple of examples. Like, in the Zen tradition, Deishan or Tokusan, it was this, ferocious, brilliant, youngish guy who was a deep scholar of the Dharma Sutra, appalled by these newfangled heresies in Buddhism, Chan, Zen, springing up in the south of China, where they said, all you got to do is look at the human heart and awaken. Look at your own heart. Really find your own heart. Look at it, be with it, trust it, and you'll find right there is Buddha, is awakenedness. So Tokusan was riled up against that sort of heresy, that no, it's a long, gradual, slow process of study and probably multiple lifetimes involved, and gradually you may come to awakening. Who knows how long? But not like that, not easy and quick and fast and sudden like that, not at all. So he went off to challenge these Zen, so-called Chan masters, and he's on his way down, and he stops at a little roadside shack where an old lady is serving tea. And this is a famous little incident in Zen annals. I don't want to go into it in too great detail, but basically she asks him a question out of the very sutra that he's been studying, the Dharma Sutra. She's obviously got some sort of Buddhist background, and she asks him, in a nutshell, so I've heard that your sutra says something about the mind being ungraspable. So with which mind will you grasp this tea I'm offering you? And it's one of these inscrutable Zen questions, and he can't answer it. And he's suddenly stopped in his tracks, and the rush of his oppositional energy is checked. And he might be dismayed. He might think, oh no, I'm not good enough, or something, or who knows what. But actually, it's a great blessing, because then he goes off to visit a nearby Zen master, Ryutan, Longtan, Dragon Swamp, Dragon Lake, goes to this guy. And it's a famous story. They talk all night. When they talk deep into the night, Tokusan asking question after question. And Longtan is a Chan master, and eventually says, it's late. Why don't you go to bed? And Tokusan steps outside and it's dark. He says, it's pitch black out there. I don't know my way. He's in an unfamiliar monastery. And so Ryutan lights a lantern for him and holds it out for Tokusan to take. And just as Tokusan reaches for it, he blows it out. Longtan himself is offering the lamp, but as Tokusan reaches for it, he, Longtan, blows it out. He just does that. One breath, and flame is gone, whisper smoke, and at that instant, Tokusan drops through the bottom of the earth. He plunges into an abyss 10,000 fathoms deep. Everything disappears. Tokusan disappears. He has a profound awakening. Profound because it's not seeing everything as one. It's not seeing he and the lantern are one. It's seeing that there's, on this level, there's never been anything at all. This great gulf, this most marvelous, boundlessly beautiful gulf opens up, and all things evaporate. And he's never known anything like this. He's never known anything like this. Always in awakening, we've never known anything like this. Every time there's a fresh lightning strike, it's always, we've never known anything like this. Always, it's ever new. It's never known anything like this. It's always new. It's always rediscovering itself, representing itself, ever new. It may sound like that can't be right. It's always, get right down to it. This deep, deep level of awakening, shunyata, all gone. Surely that's always the same. Nah, never the same. Ever new, ever new, ever new. And so anyway, his life is transformed. And in a way, the history of human spirituality, in its little way, is transformed because here we are. Zen has carried on. That moment, if all these ifs, if Ryutan hadn't blown out the lamp, if Tokusan hadn't asked for a cup of tea, but remember, it's a fairy tale. The fairy tale is actually true. That's what I mean, that it does come to this great discovery of who and what all this is can be made. And it's not a discovery that is put into words. It's an experiential one. Okay, now, having said that, and Tokusan's story, of course, goes on, but having said all that, I now want to say, actually, there's a whole family of experiences of awakening. Zen is quite fussy, forgive me for saying so, about it. I'm going to quote a little bit from Soko Morinaga, his 20th century, lovely 20th century master. When he was training under his master, I'm going to give you a little example. Okay, one morning, this is when he's a young monk. He's training under Zuigan Roshi. He's called Soko Morinaga Roshi. Great little book. An ongoing lesson in the extent of my own stupidity. It says, one morning, after I had prepared the meal and given the call to breakfast, Zuigan Roshi slowly entered the dining room and said, "Hey, go into my room and from my desk, look toward the alcove." Generally, to the ears of a novice monk, the Zen master's manner of speaking comes across much like anger. So when I heard Roshi's words, I thought with a start, uh-oh, I bungled the cleaning again and immediately rushed to his room. Roche's room was small, 4.5 tatami mats. The distance between his desk and the alcove could not have measured 2 meters, but though I carefully inspected the area, I could not find even so much as a bit of dust or a drop of water left from the swabbing I'd been doing. I crawled about the room on all fours, but I couldn't find a problem anywhere. I planted myself there for a while and tried to think it out, but I hadn't a clue as to why Roshi was irritated with me. It couldn't be helped. I resigned myself to being yelled at again and returned to the dining room. I don't understand what I did wrong in the cleaning, I nervously admitted. Please show me. You fool, Roshi said. Who said you did anything wrong? This morning, I put a single rose of Sharon in the bud vase. It goes well with the scroll and looks so beautiful. So I told you to go take a look at it. You did see the flower, didn't you? It dawned on me that I had not, in fact, noticed the flower. I went back into Roshi's room to look. The wall of the alcove was darkened. Against the smoky wall, there was a scroll with a single calligraphy for the ideograph dew. When a Zen monk writes the word dew, it is not to the natural phenomenon that he refers, but to direct revelation. Nothing concealed anywhere. Truth revealed in all things. Buddha revealed in all things. If you all just let the scales drop from your eyes, you realize then that everything everywhere is filled with truth. Everything everywhere is filled with Buddha. Everything everywhere is to be appreciated. This is what the scroll of dew was hanging there to say. Beneath the scroll, a large, pure, white blossom seemed to float out from the old plastered wall and bathe the eye with its beauty. Just moments before, I had failed to see that flower. My eyes had been tightly shut to it. And herein lies the difficulty of practice. My oversight was to become grist for my teacher's lectures. After I made this blunder, Zwigan Roshi was wont to say during talks, if the heart is caught up, fettered, you cannot see even what you are looking at, even what you are looking right at. Why, just the other day, that idiot who is sitting right over there, etc. And he gives another example. There's a patroness who comes to visit the temple and on a regular basis, and she comes and has a cup of tea with them quite often. And one day she's there, and basically she's having a conversation with the Roshi, and the young Morinaga is there as an assistant, and she says they're having this conversation, but it's strictly between the Roshi and her. But one day, probably out of pity, she sought to bring me into the conversation. And she turns to him and says, "What do you think, Morinaga?" "No, no," came Roshi's intervention. "This one is not yet fit to speak in front of anybody." It was Roshi's view that in order to speak before others, one should thoroughly know oneself. This verifying of one's own essential nature is called kensho in Zen. Those who have not had kensho are not considered fit to speak in front of other people. This incident irked me, and once again I cursed in silence this hateful old man, while he proclaims that nobody and no thing are rubbish to be ignored. Isn't he treating me like trash? I thought this to myself, but if I had dared let my attitude show, that would have been it. Roshi would have told me without hesitation, "Well, you can go on home now. There's no practice under a Roshi that you can't respect and trust." So you see, there is I mean, that's not the only way Zen is done, but there is a style of Zen where, you know, Kensho's everything, really. Pre Kensho, post Kensho. It's a sort of firm dividing line. But we don't have to be so. We actually don't have to be so strict about it like that. Even in a Zen line like ours. Well, ours actually is sort of half and half. We're Rinzai and Soto. That was a firmly Rinzai school that Morinaga was in. Sambo Zen is yes, Rinzai, also Sambo, dual transmission. Now, but the thing is, how can I convey this? Don't let's not be too shuttered and sectarian and too sort of stuck. When I was much younger, the first Zen actually that I knew about was Soto. There was a particular master that a good friend of mine had trained with called Katagiri Roshi, and I thought that's the only way to do Zen, Katagiri Roshi's way, because I'd absorbed quite a bit of it through this friend who was the Soto Zen's the only way. They call it farmer's Zen because you tend to the weeds, you tend the garden. None of that warrior Zen of Rinzai. I don't want to go near that. This is the true one, Katagiri and Soto. I don't know, just that kind of sectarian spirit just sort of welled up in me. I was a young man. And actually, when I was back in England, I couldn't, it was very hard to find any Zen, but eventually I found a little Soto school, the International Zen Association in Bristol, about 40 minutes drive from where I was living. And I used to go there. And actually, I didn't terribly like it. It wasn't like Katagiri's, I was very fixated on. And then, over time, I just started having really no choice but to explore other kinds of practice and other kinds of Zen, and wound up, in something else. And it was terrific, And so it's very important, really, that we not be too sectarian. That there are not only many beautiful, valuable forms of practice, there's a whole variety of experience within what we call awakening. Does it have core components that seem to come up again and again? Yes. What are they? Number one, discovering one. That seems to be a common thread in all world spirituality. One. We've been used to experiencing this world as a great multiplicity of things. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different things. 10 trillion different things. And all of a sudden, usually, by the way, it is all of a sudden, we get this sudden heart-stopping glimpse, jolt, sense that we can hardly articulate, that, whoa, the whole angle of vision of my experience has shifted, and I see from this different perspective, not only is there a level, a dimension of reality where all this great multiplicity is somehow single, but that includes me. I am part of this. It's not even a web. It's just one fact that somehow I am also not amongst the multiplicity of things, another separate item. I'm part of this all pervasive, all inclusive, one fabric, one body, one fact, one. So that, of course, is it's It's the most amazing thing to discover because it heals our own sense of separation instantly. So that's one facet. Kind of related to that, another facet that is probably commonly articulated and experienced in across traditions is the sense that what I've thought I was, my sense of me as a fixed, sort of solid, and it's not quite right, the right word, but determined and determinable, definable entity, me, actually has never existed the way I thought. There have been processes, mental, emotional, somatic. They've been going on, and I have taken them as evidence of there being a me. But actually, that me has been a genie, a wisp, a will-o'-the-wisp, a self-conjured dream. It conjured itself into existence and then believed itself. In fact, yeah, there's things going on, but there's no me. That also is I don't know if it's universal, but it's a common feature of awakening experiences across traditions. Okay, we could go on. And then there's the shunyata side, the emptiness side, which is more of a Buddhist emphasis, I think. Not sure, but I suspect. But there's a distinction that I also want to draw our attention to. You can see in the Zen way, especially this koan Zen way, is rather emphasizes sort of a very clear line between before and after. That, you know, we're bumbling along in our ordinary way, and then suddenly we have this kensho experience and make this sort of discovery of oneness, of no self, or in Tokusan's case, boundless goneness, zero, credible, all-pervasive zero. And then training goes on beyond that. But there are other traditions where it simply is more gradual. That I mean, for example, let's just try something. A common feature of non-dual teachers today, coming out of Advaita Vedanta, but slightly sort of modernized, is just sit, maybe close your eyes, and we're gonna notice the distinction that, you know, our consciousness, our awareness, has all this content. Things we see, things we hear, things we feel, things we think. There's all this content. What we tend not to notice so much is that there's a context for all this experience. There's a context of awareness which is holding all this experience. Now, imagine we're going way back to when you were a child and you're sitting in the back of a car being driven off to a family holiday, perhaps. And, you know, you can smell the car seats, you can hear the traffic going by, you can hear the rumble of the car, the road under the wheels. You're excited, perhaps, or fed up with your siblings in the back with you. All of that also has a context that was holding it. All of that experience was arising in an awareness. Now, the thing is that that awareness then is exactly the same as the awareness here and now, holding all this experience, being on a meditation retreat by Zoom, listening to a teacher talking, doing our sitting, our various feelings and about the anticipation of the days ahead, maybe a little bit of unease, or maybe a little bit of hopefulness and joy or peace or whatever we're finding. Maybe there's very challenging circumstances in our life right now. They're showing up in our hearts inevitably, rightly. Maybe there's blessings in our life as well, and they somehow are showing up also. But all of it is being held in awareness. There's an all-enveloping awareness. Taste it. It's a little bit like falling back 6 inches into this changeless, all-holding, all-enveloping awareness that has been present throughout your life without changing. Only the contents have changed. You may get a little taste of it or not, it's fine. If you do, you can just explore how big is it? Where are the limits of this awareness? If you push it out to either side, behind, above, below, in front, where does it end? So, we can, that's just to give you a little example that there are very different ways to come at a taste of more all-inclusive levels, registers of consciousness. And probably thousands and thousands. And they all have their value, I'm sure. Okay, there's a lot more that we'll go into through the course of this retreat together. I'm just seeing if I got any closing words. Yeah, the number one thing that I would like to encourage is really just taking up what Pema Chodron said at the very start when I quoted her, that everything we need is right here. You yourself are everything you need for this sort of great blessing of being able to practice, being able to sit with and appreciate what it is to be a living human body, mind, and heart. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. End of talk.